All right, welcome back. And to this, our first section on Adobe Premiere Elements version 14. As you well know, since you've been here throughout the duration, up to this point, everything has focused on photos and cameras. How do we take better photos? How do we clean those photos up with Photoshop elements? In short, everything's been about a single point in time. Going forward now, we're going to change our focus a little bit to go to telling a story over time. That is, how do our individual points in time interconnect and tell an overall story? Should be great fun. Now, we just went through 3 sections on Adobe Photoshop Elements, and I hope what you learned is that it's relatively easy to use. Now, granted, it's got a lot of power, a lot of functionality, which means it's going to take a little practice to figure out all those buttons and which ones to use when. But that's nothing more than practice. We're going to find that Adobe Premiere Elements might even be easier to use because they were smart about it and they went with a DVD player theme. Everything is based around this same set of buttons you're used to pushing as associated with your DVD player. Forward, fast forward, playback. You get it. All right, given that it's as intuitive as it is, we're going to jump right in and forego the workspace discussion. It's time to start building some simple videos with Adobe Premiere Elements version 14. Okay, not surprisingly, we begin by launching Premiere Elements 14 and opening a small collection of photos. For this particular example, we're going to use a bunch of shots taken at a Chicago Cubs game this past spring. Unbelievably cold. Now, like Photoshop, Premiere Elements does have a quick, guided, and expert tab. Unlike Photoshop, however, we're going to just start out right here on the expert tab, as things are just too easy here to get excited about. What I will do, however, is simplify the environment here a little bit before we begin in earnest by coming up here to the timeline menu option and selecting this option to delete all empty tracks. We'll learn more about that in a subsequent section. As you can see, Premiere then displays all these photos in this panel known as the Project Assets folder. All right, to actually add one of our photos to our video, all we do is grab and drag it down here to the Video 1 timeline. To add the second photo, just do the same thing, dropping it right behind our first. Now this looks too small to me. I can't work with this. So let's go over here to the timeline scaling zoom and increase our zoom a little so things are a little more visible. All right, that looks better. Okay, just for fun, let's play our little video now and see what we get. Note the play options we have here. Step forward and backward, rewind and fast forward, and previous and next endpoints. We're all going to be able to do this just fine because there's the same kind of buttons we expected to find on our DVD player. Set maybe the endpoints, and once you see me use those, it'll become immediately obvious. So if you're like most of us, you're going to view the start of your little video at this point and probably determine that you need to change the order of your photos. I think it's probably just human nature. Well, you know, if I did this, that, and the other thing, I'd like it just a little bit better. Okay, let's learn how to do that. Easiest way is for me to just show you. We begin by selecting these 2 photos by holding down the Shift key while clicking on the photos. We can then drag them down the timeline and get them out of the way as a group. Opens up some space for us to move this second photo back down the timeline, and then this third one back up. All makes sense. All right, now when you start getting multiple video tracks, as you soon will, you can simply move the temporary files to the open tracks instead of dragging them down the timeline. For now, this works fine, but we'll show you that when the time comes, because that's a lot easier method. All right, let's now change the duration of some of these photos, as nothing is less interesting than a DVD made up of all equal length photos. Easy enough. Hover over the end of one of the photos until you get this little square bracket thing, and then simply drag that symbol to the right or left to lengthen or shorten your photo appropriately. Note, you can check the duration of any photo. Simply click on it and the properties will be displayed. All right, before we get too far along with this project, let's do a save. Easy enough, right? We simply go up here to the File menu option and do a Save As. Pick our folder and then give the file an appropriate name. Easy peasy. Well, just for fun, let's go into that folder now where our video content lives and change the name of one of the files used in our video. Where are you going with all this, Rick? What are you trying to teach us here, you crazy old man? Well, let's go back and open our project now again. Oops. Premiere is apparently very unhappy with us because it has lost one of its files and it has absolutely no idea where to look for it. Remember the Bo Peep story and her sheep? Well, Premiere is equally stupid. It's because Premiere works off of what is known as metadata. Data about data. See, the deal is that Premiere doesn't actually store all these content files into its project file. It only stores their relative information. For example, File 1 is in the Assets folder, but never used in the video. Files 2 and 3 are used in the video. File 2 starts at time 4.5 seconds and ends at time 8.5 seconds. File 3 starts at time 10.5 seconds and ends at 20.5 seconds. You get my drift? It's not storing the exact contents. It's storing the information needed to put the video together. Well, I'm guessing by now you've already figured out Premiere's little issue here. We changed the name of a file and now Premiere's metadata is inaccurate and it's asking us to fix it. In particular, it's telling us that file img_1096 is supposed to be located at this particular folder and it's not there. Please help. Well, let's change the name back and open up again. Ta-da! No ugly air this time. Lesson: do not change the name or location of files used in a Premiere video while the project is still being produced. Once created and your DVD is fully published, then move and or rename those files however you like, but never, ever before. You'll be in big trouble and it's hard to get it back. Okay, how many of you noticed that I misspelled vignette in that last little section of video right there? Oops. As a speller, I actually make a pretty decent database designer, but not the other way around. What's the good news? Well, we're going to use it as a teaching opportunity. Yeah, right, Rick. Way to dig yourself out of this one. Regardless, here's a question. Can I now go back and change the spelling of the Premiere Elements project file? Come on, think it through. The answer is yes. And the answer is yes because it's the contents of that file that are metadata. Data pointing at data. You cannot change the names or file locations of any of the content files of that file name. But you can change the project file name itself. So let's just go back and set the record straight here and get the world back on track, and I'll go look up the proper spelling of vignette. Thanks. All right, now that we have that little mistake resolved, let's open this thing back up and finish up this section by adding in some transitions between our photos. Easy enough. Just come down here to the Transitions panel and pick a class of transitions. I think we'll use some of these 3D motion transitions. Just grab and drag one between each of the two pairs of photos. Premiere will then ask us how to position the transition. Between is fine. And also note here we have the option of changing the transition duration. Again, 1 second is the norm. It looks just fine. We'll stick with the defaults. All right, let's see what we have created here by jumping over to full screen and letting it play. Oh, you know what? For having just gotten started, it's really not too bad. Let's go ahead and save with a Control S. Don't want to lose what we put so much effort into creating. Oh, and by the way, those of you on a Mac, that Control S is actually a Command S, but you already knew that. Okay, that, you gotta admit, that's a pretty intuitive user interface. Open up Premiere, open up a bunch of media that you're going to include in your video, and then drag them onto the video timeline. Reorder them if you so choose, and then adjust their relative duration. Go ahead and put in some transitions if you like, and ultimately review your project with the full screen review function. Easy enough. But before we close, let's do a more formal review here. What did we actually learn? First, we learned how to open Premiere and add media to it. We then learned how to drag those specific media files onto the video timeline and adjust the scale on that timeline. We then took a look at reordering elements on our timeline or photos on our timeline before we went and added transitions. Transitions can be classified by type or group. Typically, only one group is used in a video because otherwise it kind of starts looking clunky. And you can also adjust how they transition between two photos as well as their relative duration. Ultimately, we then took a look at playback through the full screen option before we did a Control S save. Remember that metadata issue regarding the relocation or renaming of files. We don't want to get into a delicate situation moving forward with our projects. That is the voice of negative experience right there. And so I'm going to try to save you that one going forward. All right, that concludes this, our first discussion of Adobe Premiere Elements version 14. In the next section, we're going to start adding in some more interesting content types. So stay tuned. I look forward to seeing you then. Remember, keep on learning and have some fun out there.